I was talking to a chemical expert in the Midwest about our situation, and he was looking at some of the numbers from the independent tests, and some of the yards, he said that there were some concerning levels of dioxins, but they were not screamingly high. He talked about the EPA standards, these being over the EPA standards, but to the point where you would have to have a warning if it were a public place where people would have signs saying, hey, dioxins have been found here. And it was also at the level where he thought that some of them actually needed some remediation, where the yard would actually be plowed off. And the EPA can correct me if that's not correct, but that is what this man had determined from these tests. And I asked him, with these dioxin levels, would you be concerned at this point? And he said, well, if you're not rolling in the grass and ingesting it, then he said, I would be more concerned with the train wrecking again. And that never occurred to me, although it has occurred to a lot of other people. He said, these aren't numbers where you're going to go running, screaming out of town, but they definitely deserve second tests and follow-ups because there were some questionably high dioxin levels. I'm not sure that's being done because I don't think the EPA has even retested, and these weren't the EPA's tests. So he said he said my company would do a retest and see if those dioxin levels came the same, and then they would determine what to do. But when he said, my biggest concern would be what's to prevent this from happening again, he advised me as well, if I had the means, to get out of town, to move. And it reminds me of a story. There was a man on the roof of his house in a flood, and the water was getting higher and higher, and a rowboat came along, and a guy yells, hey, jump in the rowboat, I'll save you. And he said, no, I'm praying to God. God's going to save me. And so the guy rowed off. And as the water got higher and he climbed higher up on the roof, a motorboat came by. And he said, hey, buddy, jump in my motorboat. I'll save you. And he said, no, I'm praying to God. He's going to save me. And so the motorboat left. Water kept getting higher and higher. So he gets up to the peak of his roof. And suddenly a helicopter appears, and the guy yells down, hey, jump in this basket. We'll pull you back up and we'll save you. He yells up, I'm praying to God. God's going to save me. I don't want to get in your basket. And so reluctantly, the helicopter pilot takes off. Well, unfortunately, the water rose so high, the guy slipped in and he drowned. And he went up to heaven and he was talking to God, and he said, God, I'm a little disappointed. He said, I prayed and prayed and prayed, and you did not save me. And God said, what do you want from me? I sent a rowboat, I sent a motorboat, and I sent a helicopter. You just didn't listen. Well, so far, there are signs that we have to listen to here. First of all, the railroad did not know that their trains were on fire or their bearing was failing. Potentially 30 miles out, and the train derailed right in our town. As far as I know, to my knowledge, no rules have changed. The trains are just as long. The tracks are the same. No new enforcement has gone in, so nothing has changed besides them buying tickets to the park, sponsoring the 4th of July, sponsoring some kind of event in June, where they're going to have activities in the park, beautifying the park, making our town much better than it ever was. But I don't know that any regulations have changed. I don't know that any things on the trains have changed. What's to stop this from happening again? And, when they laid the tracks over contaminated soil, God showed us that. When they set off the chemical bomb in our town, God could be saying, hey, I made you aware of a chemical bomb that they set off in your town. I made you aware of Alan Shaw and Norfolk Southern putting tracks over contaminated soil. I made you aware of the EPA not stopping Norfolk Southern from putting those tracks over the contaminated soil. I made you aware of the chemicals in the creek. I made you aware of the chemicals in the bank. And I made you aware of the deadly chemicals seeping into your soil. And I made you aware that the burn pit where Norfolk Southern burned the chemicals was not cleaned up for 100 days. And I made you aware that the chemicals potentially have seeped under your buildings. I made you aware of the people that got sick. I made you aware of the people that are still getting sick. I made you aware of the menstrual problems. I made you aware of the skin rashes. I made you aware of the children getting sick. I made you aware of the people that are being hospitalized. I made you aware of the headaches. I made you aware of the nausea. I've made you aware of them stopping digging up the vinyl chloride when the carnival was in town. I made you aware of the diarrhea. I made you aware of all these things. I have sent you all these signs, and you still did not listen. Hopefully nobody gets sick from this, but hopefully none of us have to go to heaven and talk to God and say, "Why, God, I prayed to you." And God said, "I showed you all those signs. I don't know what's going to happen here." But I truly discounted the fact that what's to stop this from happening again?